everybody. This is Mike Donahue, and my co-host here is Brian May. Say hi, Brian.
Hey, everybody.
Brian is not the guitar player for Queen, but he does play the guitar. So we are excited that you guys are here on our YouTube channel, Groomed.Connect, and we're going to be chatting about a lot of different things. This channel is dedicated to people who are victims of spiritual, sexual, physical, mental, emotional abuse. We're going to be talking about a lot of those subjects. Today, we're going to be discussing um, the idea today is to talk a little bit about why sometimes we know something's wrong in a church situation, but we're kind of shut down, and we knew it was wrong, but we tried to say some things and we got shut down. So we're going to be talking about that. The title of today is "You Weren't Wrong, They Were Wrong." And so we're going to get into that, but I want to give you a little history on Brian and I. Brian and I come from the same church situation. We met back in the 80s, and we're not going to use names today or anything like that, but we were involved. Brian was involved at the school that my spiritual mentor or spiritual guide at the time was the superintendent, and she also was the youth pastor at the church. I was more involved in the church side of things and the youth group side of things. Brian, although he did attend the youth group kind of stuff, but most of his experience with her and with this kind of stuff was with the school. And so I released a book a couple of weeks ago called Groomed, and it's been unbelievable. Brian actually helped me quite a bit last summer when I was writing the book. I was calling him probably, I don't know, Brian, what, like at least 3 or 4 times a week,
Yeah.
sometimes more, just going through stuff and processing some of the same stuff that we both went through, and it was great. It was great having Brian there, talking to, just bouncing things off of and stuff. But when I released the book about a month ago, I really didn't realize how much feedback I was going to get, and a lot of Me Tooers, a lot of people that are jumping on saying, not even the same situation, maybe not even the same person, but some of them, they have been where they got, they got a similar situation, similar experience with pain, with hurt, with, abuse and that kind of thing. And so it has been overwhelming. Sometimes some of the stuff that I've heard also more cover up, more people coming forward saying this happened to me. And so there's some things I have to be careful with, because there's still some stuff out there that I can't talk about, but it's been overwhelming. One of the main themes I've heard is, like I said earlier, I knew something was wrong. A lot of people are saying to me, man, I knew something was wrong. This answered a lot of questions. In fact, one of the girls that read the book said, she goes, I just sat down and read this in like one sitting. This was amazing. I said, do you have any questions? And she said, no, you answered them all. And I think that's great, because it felt like, yeah, I put to words what we were all kind of feeling back in the day. And so, Brian, I want to just kind of talk, and Brian's just a really smart guy, and I'm pretty tuned into a lot of this stuff. At least that's what he's paid me to say. I want to ask you, Brian, because a lot of what I'm hearing from people is that, like I said, they were silenced, right? When they tried to say some things about some of the unjust things that they were seeing, they were shut down. Why does that happen in church situations, in your opinion?
So I think in my experience, you've got to turn the clock back to why the people were attracted to this particular group to begin with. And most of us came in with some sort of need we were looking to get met. There was some sort of brokenness in our life, something that was absent. And we found it there. And ultimately, you were looking for a place where you could belong, where you could feel valued, and you could be loved. And when you found that place, initially that's a very satisfying kind of a thing, and it creates an attachment to that group. And so initially, you are taught that the people who are leading the group are special, that they have special gifts and special talents. And even though they wouldn't come out and say it directly, there was always this implication that they were somehow on a plane above the normal person, and they had a special access to God, special line to God. They had special gifts and special talents that were endowed to them by God. And you thought, well, these are the God people. I should listen to them. And you created that paradigm in your mind. And one of the things they did fundamentally was they created this idea that if you were going against them, you were at risk of going against God. And because they spoke for God, they represented God. And that was pretty intimidating, obviously, especially if you're new to faith, if you're new to that church. I mean, I had no religious background growing up, and I came in my early 20s. My wife and I actually did. We weren't married then. And so, who wants to go against God? I mean, that's not a fight I'm going to pick, right? Probably the other thing they had as well was that, and this is very typical of cults. I mean, if you look, I'm not a cult expert, but read a couple books, watched all the documentaries, and one of the things you see in a cult is there's this fear of ostracism. And so in this particular group, they really created this sort of strata around these special leaders that you wanted to be close to them. I mean, they had a special leadership group in this particular group. I'll say the name because it won't reveal anything. They called it JC Power, right? And you wanted to be in that group because you got access to the big leaders. And if you begin to question things, or if you had a different opinion on something, you're on the risk of being ostracized. You did all this work to get into this, this special group. And if you were to, begin to question that, if you didn't, mind your P's and Q's, you begin to get ostracized. You begin to get pushed back. And those were probably two of the main levers that of the many. There's many more we could talk about, but those were a couple of the primary levers, I would say, that were being pulled to accomplish that.
So when you did go and say, okay, wait, there's a lot of good things that are happening, right? There's a lot of, like you said, you feel valued, you feel like somebody really cares about you, and you also feel competent because they put you in situations, leadership
Right.
positions where people are needing you and they rely on you, and that's a good feeling, and it's a feeling of responsibility. But then you start to see some things, and give some examples of what you begin to see that raises some red flags in that particular ministry, and maybe even generally what people may see.
So a couple of things. In general, if you're sharp at all, most human beings are, you begin to pick up on um, all of the emotional manipulation that surrounds the meetings and surrounds the everything, all of the relationships. There's this intense emotional manipulation. Mike talks about a lot in his book. There's a lot of love bombing and that kind of a thing. I'll tell you a couple of stories. So one's a little bit more general. The particular leader of this group used to set up shop on Saturdays in a local restaurant. And if you were part of that inner circle, you could get an appointment to go sit down and talk to her, and you got like 50 minutes one-on-one, audience with the queen kind of a thing. And after you did it a few times, you begin to understand what the game was, because you would go in and you would sit down, and probably the first 5 or 10 minutes, you would get some of the dirt on the person that was there before you, right? Like, she was like letting you in, because you were special, you were close, and she would let you in on that. And then, it didn't take too long to put two and two together that you had to be pretty careful what you said in those situations, because you knew that the next person that was coming in, they were going to get the dirt on you, right? And so, you know, in a subtle way, there, that kind of thing was going on, and it was, um, and if you begin to challenge that and say, hey, look, this just isn't right, you in that sense, you wound up with a brick wall, and that's when, you know, various tactics would be pulled out. You know, they would either tell you, well, you know, you got a critical spirit. You really got to watch that critical spirit because, you know, again, we're the God people, that kind of a thing. So another context I saw it was at the school. Now, I taught at the school, and I had a couple of things going for me. One was I was a man, and there weren't a lot of men. We had an inordinate number, but I mean, it was hard to attract a man to teach at a Christian school. Um, didn't make very much money. So it was hard to get a head of household in there. And so I had that. Plus, I taught all the hard stuff. I taught physics. I taught calculus. I taught, you know, all of those kinds of things. And they wanted to have a high school. You had to offer those kinds of things. And, um, you know, I had a pretty good suite to offer them. And so we would see things at the school. I'm going to give you a kind of a mundane example, but it's really going to paint a picture. We used to do a walkathon every year, a 20-mile walkathon. And it would always happen like right at the beginning of the school year. So it was like August, early September. And, you know, this is in Omaha, Nebraska. And if you've ever been in Omaha, Nebraska in August, early September, it's kind of hot. It can get humid here. And we had this rule that you couldn't wear shorts to do this walkathon. And every year the kids would come to me and they would say, hey, could you talk to them? And could you just ask them, could we wear shorts just for the walkathon? Um, and so I carried that message to the leader, the superintendent of the school. And she would like look at me and she said, oh, yeah, you know what? I'm with you. I'm with you there. We really need to stand up for these kids and that kind of a thing. You let me handle it. Right. And so you would bring that, and she would sort of draw you into her confidence that, you know, she was on your side. She was going to take care of it. Yet nothing ever changed, which was evidence that all that was, you know, it's like having a suggestion box that you never empty, right? And that you never look at, or you empty into the trash can. I probably spent my last 10 years in this church after that particular leadership was gone and new leadership came in. Um, Pushing back hard on a lot of things, and I'll admit, I mean, if you're out there and you were one of the people on the other side of that conversation, I wasn't my best self when I did all of that.
Yeah, but you get frustrated. I mean,
Well,
you
you
get
do.
frustrated at getting the same answers.
Well, you do. And I can remember one instance when the pastor, who was, I mean, he's actually a friend of mine. I've known him since the eighth grade. I pushed back on a lot of things, and we had questioned a lot of things, both on just the basis of theology and just the way things were doing. You know, people were doing things, and I got called to a coffee at Starbucks one day, and the question was, I really need to understand where you're coming from because I have to determine if we can continue to do ministry together. You know, and mind you, I wasn't off the rails in terms of like, you know, anything that wasn't in the Christian canon and the things I was exploring. We were just really trying to understand the better nature of God. But the point of that story is that, you know, there it is right there. I need to understand if we can continue to do ministry together, which
That's what that
means
person told you, right?
that's what that person told. That's what that person told
Right.
me, and that means, you know, that the stakes are high, right? You're invested in this place, and we need to understand if, like, you know, like you're a true believer, and we can trust you. And I played a lot of roles at this church. My wife and I taught a lot of Sunday school classes. We led prayer meetings on a weekly basis for probably 10 years. I was a worship leader. I was on the worship team. Um, you know, and like it or not, you draw a lot of value for those things. They become part of your
Right.
lifestyle. And
Yeah.
when you hear that, um, it's like,
So essentially, he was saying, you can't do ministry unless you see it the way we see it,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
Was that the message you were getting?
That was the message I was getting. Right.
Yeah.
And and because I am who I am, I wrote it back. I wrote a very long email and said, "Look, you know what? This is where I stand, and this is why I stand there. And if you'd like to sit down and talk about it, we can sit down and talk about it." And I'll tell you from
Yeah.
that point on that I talked about that ostracism, that pushback began to happen. Things began to fall away, and um, I was willing to pay that price because where I was progressing was more important to me than being a part of what they're doing. But a lot of people get a lot of what they do is they create this connection. They set the hook where they are the source of your value, and what you're able to do within the confines of their ministry is the source of your value. And if you are so strongly attached to that, that becomes a powerful thing. And they would tell you things like, well, you're kind of on a slippery slope there, really worried about you, don't read that book because, you could really, that could really take you in a place where, you know, you might not want to go. I mean, I recently saw a comment from an old student of mine that was like, man, I hope you're not, I hope you're not into, any of this like new waves of spiritual thinking because we're afraid that you might lead people astray. And it's like very, very, very low intellectual sort of analysis, but very high consequence, high severity of asking those questions.
Right. Right. And I think that's one of the tactic that cults use is to be the only voice. They don't want you to have another voice. They don't want you to
Yeah,
hear any other, like, I don't understand that. Like, what are you afraid of if I, if I learn some new things, or if I, go outside the fence a little bit, um why is that a threat to you? And it's usually a threat to them because they want to be the only voice. They want to be controlling. And I think that's the the thing that we probably need to explore a little bit, because I think a lot of people feel that way. They feel like if they question their authority, and there's obviously a way to do it without being, and you, it sounds like you did it with respect, and you didn't do it, you didn't get a bunch of people together and like on a witch hunt against the pastoral staff or whatever. You were just asking questions about what was evolving here, what was going on here. And I think a lot of people feel that way. They feel like I might not understand completely why you're making this decision. And as soon as you take that to the leader, a lot of times they use those manipulative tactics. I personally think that person that you talked about at at that restaurant, uh, that she did that on purpose. That she talked about those people on purpose, knowing that you were going to deduct that and know that, hey, I better be careful what I say, because that's a weapon. She's weaponizing information, and very tactically using, letting you know that that's what she does. She uses information to she weaponizes it to to use it to her advantage. And to me, that's false intimacy. Like, she creates a false intimacy.
correct.
She gets you to say, she gets you to hear some juicy stuff. And who doesn't like gossip? Let's just be honest, right? I mean, I like to hear. I heard some gossip today about my family. I'm kind of intrigued about it. But anyways, we we like gossip, right? So she knows that, and people tend to eat that up pretty good. Um, and I think that's one of the things it's false intimacy. It's
Yep.
we've got a secret together, and
Yep.
a lot of groomers use those techniques.
Right. She would bring you into a place where you perceive that you were in a place of confidence, that as though she were your confidant, right? So that and many people will do that. They'll bring you in that place, and to your point, it's really false intimacy. It's a manipulative technique, but again, if you go back to the beginning, it's like if you are looking for that attachment, if you're looking for that status, if you're looking for that value in that relationship, they would lever that and bring you in that place of confidence. And then they would, as you said, use it against you. I told you the other day, I looked up um, the definition of the word treacherous, and it fit that to a bill. I mean, they would bring you into their confidence, but then they would betray you routinely by violating that. And
Right.
but you're right. It was a signal. It's like, watch out, be careful, because we
Right.
have power, we have influence.
Right. Right. And I think, wrapping this up, I want to talk to the people who right now are going, I told you so. Like, the list of the group I've got, the groupings that I have from people that have commented about the book, and what they experienced. Some of them feel duped. Some of them feel like, you know what, I went along with this, and I kind of knew something wasn't right, but I just went along with it anyways because I looked up to some of my leaders who were like, we talked about this today, you and I, about cultural permission. When you're in that group, right? You're in that a group like this, because it's not just our situation. There are many situations like this where you're in this community and you're young, you're a new one, you're a new beginner or whatever, a new person in this community. You look up to people who are maybe not the head leader, but maybe they're lieutenants or whatever. They're big names in this ministry. I had those people, and I was seeing things I didn't think were right, but I looked at them and went, well, they didn't really say anything, so they must be okay with it. And there's a cultural permission. We'll talk about that for a minute.
So let me back away from that just a little bit. One of the things that, and especially if you were in this group or in a group like this, one of the things, if you think about it for a minute, just take a minute and sit down. If you're one of these people, think about what your life looked like at that time. I bet you were busy. I wager that you spent a lot of time at church or at church related functions. Or if you were in employment, for instance, I was a teacher. I had 6 different preps. I went to basketball games. I went to all these kinds of things. Pretty much your whole life revolved around that. If you weren't at home eating or sleeping or mowing your lawn, you were doing something involved with church, sometimes 7 days a week. And so that was your world. You didn't have a lot of friends outside of that world. And so your frame of reference was very narrow.
Right.
And all of the people around you were living exactly the same life you were. You were in that
And let
frame
me
of
stop for a
reference.
minute. They set that up. They made you, if you were going to be involved in that level of leadership, you had to adopt that lifestyle.
Yeah,
There was no casual attenders, right? When you
no,
got to that level, you were doing what you just described. We were all doing,
right,
right?
right. Yeah, you weren't going to church on Sunday and maybe Wednesday and then, just living your life beyond that. I mean, even after I left teaching and went into my current career, you still had that level of engagement if you wanted to be part of that. So yeah, that's exactly what they set that up. So so that's your world. And there's that strata in that world. There are certain people that you looked up to. And they were very good at putting on a persona. Now, interesting study on the word persona. Persona is just a mask, right? It comes from Greek theater. They were putting on this mask or this persona that they were righteous, they were dedicated, we were doing a noble thing. This was the way, and you were an elite, soldier for God, and lucky to be involved in this. Um, and so when you're in that world, you look up to those people, you see what they're doing, and as you said before, sometimes you see weird things like, okay, so this is a silly example, but my friend that became the pastor after this woman, I learned that if he didn't want to take a phone call, he would step out in the hallway, and the secretary would say, "Well, he's out of the office right now." I mean, that's a lie, right? It's a little lie, but it's a lie. And you begin to see some of those chinks in the armor, and you begin to question some of those things. And so I'm a little off track, but But when you see that, it's difficult for you, and that's your only frame of reference. It's difficult for you to question whether it's you that's got a problem
Right.
and not
Right.
them. Because you
Right.
think, again, they're the God people, right? They supposedly know all the stuff. They're the special folks.
Right.
And to question that has some gravity to it. And when your frame of reference is so narrow,
Right.
um, then
Right.
you
Because you don't know,
you
you're
don't,
new, you
yeah,
came into the
right.
thing. Yeah. Right.
And
When
so
you say
you question
gravity,
yourself. Yeah,
right. The gravity is the the ostrich, what's the word?
ostracism.
The yeah, when you get ostracized by people you love, people who you
Right,
respect, when all of a sudden they're giving you the cold shoulder, you're like, ooh, I better not ask questions anymore. And
right,
that's a definite signal. That's a strategy that they
right,
use to get you to shut up, because it's your
right,
family. These are people that you want to stay close to, but you have these questions. And I think a lot of people are in that dilemma, that tension of, man, this doesn't feel right, but I don't want to disappoint these people that I really love. What am I to do? And I
right.
think that's a legitimate tension.
Well, and also um, well, let me give you an example of that. I led worship fairly often at the church for a while, and um, as we begin to go through this process of questioning, just it wasn't abrupt; it was very gradual. It's like they quit asking. Nobody came to me and said, "Hey, look, we're going in a different direction, or we're doing a different thing, or da 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 da," or you sing like a wounded duck, or anything like that. I mean, it just
That's me. That's me.
it it just happened,
Right.
without any comment, to the point where I talked to the pastor once, and I said, that was a pretty crappy thing to do, and to not even say anything to me. I said, if you had a reason, you should have said it. And this is like a year later, after I realized I'd just been kind of shoved out of the picture. I'm not very quick, but I do pick up eventually. But um,
You are good.
and I mean, his comment was, "Well, we just decided to go in a different direction." And to his credit, I think it ate at him, because about a year after that, he called me up. He said, "I'm sorry. I really should have said something to you." So, anyway,
Yeah.
I mean, that's one thing that can happen to you, and and that leaves you without any reason or definition. So when you treat people like that, when there are consequences but they're not expressed, you begin to wonder. It's like, man, what's wrong with me? What did I do?
What's wrong with me?
You begin to
Yeah.
question yourself, and you're taught in that environment to trust the leaders.
Right.
I mean, in a lot of places, I mean, you don't make decisions about who you're going to date or who you're going to marry, or um, you learn to trust the leaders. You learn it because you know they get that brainworm in you that they're the ones to be
Right.
trusted.
They
And so
groom
what?
you
Right.
they groom you to rely on them for
Exactly.
even those specific things you mentioned. Your marriage partner,
Yeah.
your occupation. I remember I got an assignment to Panama, which I'm glad I didn't take, actually. But I remember that it wasn't even a choice. I remember people coming to me and saying, God said you need to stay here, and without giving me the privilege of process. And I do want to do a podcast sometime about the privilege of process and how God le- gives us the freedom to make choices
Yep.
with parameters, but they don't do that. They
No.
tell you what choice you need to make, and if you don't make that choice, if you don't do what they want you to do, they ostracize you. They squeeze you by rewarding you if you do the right decision, and ostracizing you if you don't make the right decision. We need to wrap this up, Brian, but I want to give you a chance to just kind of close up your your thoughts on this, and then we'll set up for the next podcast.
So let me just tell one more quick story. So when I was
Sure.
teaching, I was making. Now my wife was also teaching, but when I was teaching, my salary, if we'd been living on my salary, I would have been maybe a couple of $1,000s over the poverty line. So we were making a financial sacrifice to be there. And nobody at the church except for the seniors got paid. So senior pastors, I mean, everybody was kind of in that same boat. And we decided that my oldest was almost 2 years old, and my wife really wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. Her choice, not mine. And we went and we sat down across the desk of the pastor, and I said, I'm going to resign from the school because of this, and gave him all those reasons. I mean, I want to be able to provide for my family. My wife would like to be a stay-at-home mom, blah, blah, blah. Reasonable stuff, right? He looked at me across his desk, and he said, well, I can't tell you that that's God's will. So as I reflect, and we both looked at him, and it was like, oh, really? Because we're pretty convinced. But the point of that is that, and this is what I want to wrap this up with. People like this will treat you, teach you, train you, manipulate you into not trusting your gut, into not trusting your intuition. And no matter what your spiritual background is, I mean, this particular group of people, they would tell you that you need to listen to the voice of the Holy Spirit, right? Unless it disagreed with them. And really,
Right.
and really what you're
They are the
talking,
voice of the Holy Spirit.
yeah, you're talking about trusting your gut, trusting your intuition. And
Right.
that's a gift from God for all of us, is that gut. Now, can it lead us astray? Sure, it can. I mean, but I think for most of us, that's a far safer place to be. And I know as I reflect back on my experience, I wish there would have been some times I would have trusted my gut and I would have gone with my gut. So I
Yeah,
guess that's how I would
we
wrap
should
that
do a
up.
whole segment on that, and
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
that falls into the privilege of process where God gives
right.
us those feelings and those thoughts, and they go along with His will. Well, Brian, this has been awesome. Really good content, and good discussion. So I want to just those of you that are out there listening to this, we're going to be putting one of these out every week, and just discussing not just spiritual abuse, but we're going to be getting into some other types of abuse that have happened to different people. And in my book, I talk about some sexual abuse that happened to me when I was a kid, and we want to unpack some of these things. Just the whole idea that people use love to take advantage of people. Brian talked about it a little bit in the context of what we grew up with, at that church in Nebraska. But also, there's all kinds of churches and situations where people will use love to manipulate and to draw people in. So, thank you so much for tuning in to this podcast. This is the book. It's called Groomed. There'll be information in the comments on the YouTube channel. Like the YouTube channel. Follow us on Groomed.Connect, and would love to keep in contact with you. Also, my website is MikeDonahueConnects.com. Our Instagram channel is Groomed.Connect, and also with Facebook, it's the same thing, Groomed.Connect. So I'd love to have you guys join us and follow us. Have a great week. Take care. Bye-bye.